So guys, big and very important news has just come out of Islamabad. And honestly, this situation could have a serious impact not just on the region, but on the entire world. After almost 21 hours of continuous high-level negotiations, the United States and Iran failed to reach any agreement. Now, this wasn't just a routine meeting. This was actually the highest level direct engagement between the two countries since 1979, which already tells you how serious and rare this moment was. Expectations were very high. Many people were hoping for at least some kind of breakthrough, but in the end, everything collapsed into a complete stalemate. Let's break this down in a simple and realistic way so you can fully understand what actually went wrong here. And just a quick heads up, I'm not really a professional video editor, so I'll mostly be using simple or stock footage here. So yeah, apologies if the visuals feel a bit boring, but stick with me. The information is what really matters. The biggest and most important issue was the nuclear program. This has always been a core conflict between the U.S. and Iran, and once again, it became the main reason why talks failed. The U.S. side, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, made it very clear that their primary goal was to completely shut down Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons. They didn't just want temporary limits or partial restrictions. They wanted a permanent commitment that Iran would never build a nuclear bomb and would also give up the tools that could allow them to do so in the future. From the U.S. perspective, this makes sense because they see Iran having nuclear weapons as a major global security threat. But from Iran's perspective, this demand was seen as completely unacceptable. Iran argued that nuclear technology is their sovereign right, and they should be allowed to develop it for peaceful purposes. They also viewed the U.S. demands as excessive and unfair, almost like being forced to give up their independence in this area. So right from the start, both sides were standing very far apart, and neither was willing to compromise on such a critical issue. When you have a situation where both parties consider something a red line, it becomes extremely difficult to find any middle ground. Now, the second major issue, which is equally important but maybe less talked about, was the control of the Strait of Hormuz. This is one of the most strategic waterways in the world because around 20% of global energy supply passes through it. So, whatever happens there directly affects oil prices, global trade, and even the economy of many countries. Iran demanded that they should have control over the strait, and even proposed collecting transit fees from ships passing through. From their point of view, this is part of their regional influence and strategic positioning. But the U.S. strongly rejected this idea and insisted that the strait must remain open and accessible to all countries without any restrictions. To make things more serious, the U.S. even started moving military assets toward the region, including preparations for mine-clearing operations during the ceasefire period. This shows that the issue was not just theoretical or diplomatic, but had real military implications as well. When discussions involve both economic control and military presence, tensions naturally rise very quickly. Another major problem during these talks was confusion and disagreement over economic concessions, especially regarding Iran's frozen assets. Iranian sources claimed that the U.S. had agreed to unfreeze funds that were being held in countries like Qatar and other foreign banks. This would have been a big relief for Iran's economy, which has been under heavy sanction for years. However, U.S. officials clearly denied making any such agreement. This created a situation where both sides were not even aligned on what had been discussed or promised. When one side believes a deal has been made and the other side denies it completely, it damages trust even further and makes future negotiations even harder. On top of all this, the scope of the negotiations itself became another point of conflict. Iran decided to expand its list of demands beyond the core issues. They started including things like war reparations and a broader ceasefire that would also cover areas like Lebanon. From their perspective, this might have been an attempt to address wider regional concerns and gain more leverage. But the U.S. delegation was not interested in expanding the discussion. They want to keep things focused and limited to specific goals, including nuclear restrictions, maritime security, and ending the current hostilities that began on February 28, 2026. So once again, both sides were not just disagreeing on solutions, they were disagreeing on what topics should even be discussed. And honestly, when negotiations lose focus like this, it becomes very difficult to make progress. Instead of solving one problem, you end up creating 5 more. But if we look deeper, the real underlying issue behind all of this was a complete lack of trust. According to Pakistani mediators, the atmosphere during the talks was very tense. There were mood swings, rising tempers, and emotional reactions from both sides. This is not the kind of environment where successful diplomacy usually happens. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagh Ghalibaf openly stated that the U.S. had failed to gain their trust. On the other hand, the U.S. maintained that they had already presented their final and best offer before walking away from the talks. So both sides left the table feeling that the other side was unreasonable. Right now, the situation is still very delicate. The talks have been paused, not permanently ended, and there is a fragile 2-week ceasefire in place. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar has urged both countries to respect the ceasefire and avoid any actions that could lead to a full-scale conflict again. Now, if I share my personal opinion on this, I would say that this outcome was not really surprising. When both sides enter negotiations with fixed positions and very strong red lines, the chances of success are already very low. The nuclear issue alone is so sensitive and important that it can break any deal. Then when you add control over a major global trade route, disagreements over money, and a lack of trust, it almost becomes impossible to reach an agreement. The worrying part is what happens next. When diplomacy fails, tensions usually don't just disappear. They often increase. And because the situation involves major global interests like oil supply and regional security, the consequences could be much bigger than just these two countries. At the same time, it's important to understand that negotiations like these are never easy. Even though this round has failed, it doesn't necessarily mean that future talks won't happen. Sometimes these failures actually help both sides understand each other better and come back with more realistic expectations. But for now, the situation remains uncertain and fragile. Everything depends on whether both sides are willing to step back, rebuild some level of trust, and try again with a more practical approach. So the big question is, was a deal even possible in this situation, or was it always going to fail from the start? That's something people around the world are now debating. Let me know what you think.